Hello students, and welcome to your first online lesson. We're going to see how this goes, and we might be doing more of this in the future. I want to get through this last class of notes. That's all we have before the test. If we are allowed to come back to campus, we'll have a test when you return. So we want to get a test in if possible. If not, we're going to go from there and we'll just figure it out. We're all going to be flexible. That's the name of the game. So what we got is for our last day of notes for this unit is still on sound, and we have to talk about some sound frequency things. Now there is some fun things that happen with sound, and let me see if I can make this happen here. I was going to do this to you. You see all my games there for my son. I was going to play this just to annoy you, but you know these whistle things here. Now, I don't know if that's coming through your speakers or not at home, but it should be annoying. Now I can still hear that one, but here it starts to fade away. I can feel it in my jaw. These dog whistle things, and I'm sure you've heard them before. I'm going to turn to here. You can see the hertz, the frequency. Look at that there. See that number? Vibrating 3,581 times a second. Now, let's talk about what the reality is versus what we hear, because it's different. So now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is intensity. Intensity is how hard the waves are hitting your ear. Think of it like the amplitude of the wave. If it were a transverse wave, it would be the height of the wave. But sound is a longitudinal wave, and so it's going to be how hard those particles are hitting the particles next to them. Now, when those particles hit your ear, do you feel like you're getting hit in the ear? Like pow, 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 pow. Every time I speak, every time you watch a movie, do you feel like you're getting hit in the ear, like actual hits? Or do you feel its volume? Because what the reality is that there's the hits, but what our brain does is it codes it into loudness. We have an amazing brain that does amazing things. It takes stuff from the environment and then it makes it and transforms it in a way that we can understand it. And the way that you and I understand intensity is through loudness. So it's just soft or loud. We don't feel light hits versus hard hits. We feel a volume change. The second thing, and I would unpack this perhaps a little bit more if I had a class full of kids, but we'll just kind of burn through it and you'll appreciate the respecting of your time. The next thing is the frequency, which is what you are hearing. Now, when you and I hear frequency, what you and I and our brains do with it is it turns it into pitch. High notes and low notes. That's what our brain does with it. So, but the reality is how many hits per second. For instance, you've seen these tuning forks before. This is 250 hertz. Now, when you heard that just now, did you sit there and go, that felt like 250 hits every second on my ear? And then somebody, no, I think that one is a little bit off tune. I think it was 245. No, 256. You and I weren't counting anything. We didn't have a sense of quantifying anything. It was that's a note. That's a A, that's a B flat, that's a whatever you think it is. 250 hertz. So what happens is we get all these hits on our ear, rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat, and then our brain codes it, transforms it into pitch. I think the best way to think about this is if you were an alien, or aliens came to our planet and observed us, like on their own nature channel. Next on the nature channel, humans. They would be amazed at our ears. They would sit there and go, because let's suppose they didn't have the sense of hearing. They'd have their own set of senses, but perhaps not hearing. And they would be able to measure vibrations in the air, in the air with their instrumentation and go, these human creatures are really interesting because they have these flaps on the side of their head that are capable of picking up vibrations in the air. And then the other alien students would go, really, what do you do with vibrations in the air? I mean, they're just vibrations. And they would go, it's really weird. Because they can hear, they wouldn't say hear, the vibrations allow them to know when something's coming. They can tell when something around the corner is coming, like a car, and they even before they can see it, they know it's there because the vibrations shook the air. And they say, oh, well, that's a good skill. They go, well, it's even more than that. These human creatures with the vibrations in the air can communicate with each other. Like communicate, yeah. They have these things in their throat, these cords. We dissected one of these humans, but we saw these cords in their throats, and they can stretch and they blow air over it, and it vibrates the air all around, and so they can use it to send vibrations to their fellow humans. And they say, well, that's really great. That's what are they communicating? Are they just communicating danger and safety? Well, it's actually, they seem to be communicating more than that, because these humans, they'll come around and sit in a desk, or at homes as it is, and they'll just, with their organs here, they'll just sit there and pick up these vibrations for 85 minutes at a time. And they'll just sit there. It's more than just danger and help. They're actually seeming to be learning something and acquiring information. And we don't know what this information is, because all they're picking up is hits on the ear. Fast hits and slow hits. They don't understand that those hits became pitches, that we articulated into a phonetic system of alphabet, that then we assemble into words and paragraphs. Each sound that has each frequency is associated with a sound, and those sounds come together and become a word, and then those words express ideas and are all symbols of a larger, each one a concept, and this was all together. They wouldn't understand the volumes of books that we have in the movie, all of these things where we have information encoded. What they would only pick up is frequency, hits on the ears. Do you understand the significance of it? And they'd be like, yeah, and it's really weird, because not only do they seem to communicate information through these hits on the ear, they also seem to get pleasure. They will join together in large spaces, and these people will make vibrations on the various devices, and the people will all come as they and they'll crank up these vibrations to great intensity, and the people will all rhythmically follow those vibrations and hypnotically follow, bobbing their heads, almost getting swept up, and we've checked their brain waves, and they just really get wrapped up in this. Because the reality, though, is that the point I'm trying to make is that the intensity and frequency is the reality, but our brain codes them into simple things. So sometimes when I hear that animals have abilities of echolocation and so forth, and I try to figure out what do they get in their brain, sometimes it might put together some sort of sensation and encode it differently, and maybe they get a picture of it. Maybe they get pitches. How would you explain pitch to a person who's never heard before? How would you explain loudness to a person who's never heard before? You can't. We could explain frequency to that person. We could explain intensity to that person, to a deaf person, but we could not explain loudness or pitch unless you've experienced it. This is something inside of us that our brain has been gifted with by God to be able to understand and capture a great amount of information through vibrations. It's really impressive. We can do the same kind of conversation with light and color, because light is also a frequency, and there's different frequencies, which we're going to learn about next unit, and there's different intensities of light. But what we have happen with light is we have bright and dark. How would you explain bright and dark to a person or an alien who's never seen before? How would you explain color to a person who's never seen before? How do you explain certain, like color green, or the color red, I should say, to certain colorblind people? You say, oh, it's like pink, but just not, but darker pink. You know, red is darker pink. Like, what's pink? That color, oh, you mean light green. You see, they would not understand color if you've never seen the color. And this is how sound is. So when you hear sound, appreciate how truly amazing it is. All right, let's move ahead. Now that we understand that, we can also mention this. Those high pitches, I mentioned that maybe I can't hear the ones that you can hear. And sometimes you have a student who can't hear certain ones because they've been listening to music too loud. But as people go deaf, as you age and you lose the sense of hearing, sometimes it's not the intensity that's the issue. Like, talk real loud for me. Sometimes it's the frequency. We joke that my dad can't hear bats because we were in some caves once and we heard some bats and we said, "Dad, did you hear that?" And it was, "No, I didn't hear it." There it is again. "Did you hear it?" "No, I didn't hear it." For the whole hike through these caves, he didn't hear the bats. We thought, "Oh, Dad's just getting old," but he could hear us just fine. We didn't have to shout to him. He could hear, but it was a particular frequency that his eardrums couldn't keep up with. They could shake just fine and keep up, but once they surpassed a certain speed, a certain hertz of hits on his eardrum, then it was those pitches he couldn't hear. And that happens to everybody. I mean, a small child's going to be able to hear frequencies that you can't hear. It's kind of fun because it used to be, before the phones had the vibrate feature, and you can ask your parents about this. Before phones had the vibrate feature, kids would have to get a special ringtone that their teachers couldn't hear, called the mosquito ringtone. And it was at a frequency high enough for the kids to hear, but too high for their teachers to hear. And then you would know you were getting a call or a text. And then they invented the vibrate feature on the phone, and now people don't use that anymore. So kids could be sneaky to teachers. But also it allows grown-ups to be rude to kids, because we could play high frequencies all throughout our neighborhood and keep all the kids away. And the kids won't know where it's coming from, but we could play speakers through our attics to all the children that sit there and go, "Oh, this is annoying, let's go sit over by that house instead." So you can use this both ways. It's kind of fun. All right. Now, when you change the frequency, you change the pitch. So I got this slide whistle here. Listen to this. What I'm doing is I'm changing the wavelength. It doesn't work very well. That's not good. As it gets a longer wavelength, as the wavelength gets big, the pitch gets, the frequency, let's use the right words, the frequency gets small. As the wavelength gets big, the frequency gets small. And we did some work with some formulas that we know that speed left to right for you guys. Speed equals wavelength times frequency. The speed will always stay the same in that medium. But if the wavelength gets bigger, the other factor, the frequency, has to get smaller. And vice versa. You know how math works. We've done a bunch of those where you saw the relationships within a formula. But as one grows, the other shrinks. And you're watching that happen here. You know it with piano strings and violin strings. The bigger the wavelength, the smaller the frequency. The smaller the wavelength, and you hold your finger real tight up on the guitar, the violin, the note, the frequency goes up.